D2L programs teach adults to prevent, recognize, and react responsibly to CSA. Till date, they have trained over 8,000 authorized facilitators who teach the program in 50 states and 16 international locations, and more than 980,000 copies of Stewards of Children have been distributed to communities around the world. Cindy is the director of programs at Darkness to Light. And Paula is an expert in culture-changing educational program design. She's a former child and family therapist and an expert in CSA and trauma recovery. I welcome you all.
So hello, welcome back from lunch. I want to thank the foundation for having us. We're thrilled to be here with you in India and give you a sampling of our programs and help us launch an effort that will bring our program ultimately to India for the benefit of you and the benefit of children of India. So I just want to take a quick 3 or 4 minutes to tell you a little bit about Darkness to Light and what we're doing, and then I'm going to hand it over to Paula, who's actually, as I said, going to give you a sampling of our program, and we chose one today that we think, obviously you'll know a lot of the information, but we find it interesting because one aspect that we think is important is that we start engaging bystanders who can intervene on behalf of children. So we're going to take a look at that. So we were founded in 2000. We are located in Charleston, South Carolina, but our program is used in all 50 states. And we are empowering people to prevent abuse from occurring, to recognize it if it's happening, and to react responsibly if it is happening. So we believe that no child should experience the trauma of sexual abuse, and that it is an adult responsibility to actively protect children from it. And that's not to say that educating children about their bodies and personal boundaries and safety from sexual abuse isn't important. That is important. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with adults to protect children. We have the knowledge, we have the empowerment, and we have the skill. But in order to have that empowerment, knowledge, and skill, adults have to be educated. And so, that's going to require changing culture, right? To provide this education, first to have people understand that education is necessary to do prevention right, and also that, it's really the first step in getting the culture change. If we can educate enough adults, we can cause a shift in our culture. Education of everyday adults is critical, obviously not certain segments of the population. We need to get to everyday adults. And we work through partners, and with our partners, we're serving as catalysts for change, that culture change I was talking about. And our belief is that the solutions that we bring must be scalable and broadly accessible. And so, again, it's in order for us to create what we would call a tipping point in our culture, where we actually do the necessary things that protect children from sexual abuse, we need to be educated. In order to educate those people that would create a tipping point, the solution has to get to a lot of people. Not everybody, and that's a great thing about our program, is because once you take our program, and we know this to be true, that people go away, and not only do they implement what they learned for prevention strategies, but they also talk to other adults. And that's key. They immediately have a conversation with someone else, so it sort of spreads. And not only are the people around them better educated, but also other people then have interest in seeing the program. So our strategic pillars are to educate, obviously to make education for everyday adults widely and broadly accessible, not only to caregivers, but to youth-serving organizations, schools, athletics, after-school programs, and anybody who interacts and works with children in their professional life. We activate, we're working with individuals and activists and influencers to take the action, the necessary actions to promote change, which is like requiring education. And we partner with organizations all across the United States, and our local partner here in Mumbai, Jeevan Edhar, has been a wonderful partner to work with, and is currently helping us do the on the ground work in Mumbai. Just a couple of achievements really quick. We were a top 5 nominee from the United Nations Foundation in the child rights category, and that was pretty huge. We're the only program listed as a model program by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention in the U.S. So it's the only U.S. government program that's listed as a model program. It's the only program of its kind that's been scientifically studied to show that not only does it improve knowledge and improve attitudes, but it also changes behavior. And that's where prevention happens. You have to change people's behavior. The way we do that is we educate the mind and we move the heart, and we do that through survivor stories. So all of our training uses survivor stories because that's key to creating the emotional connection. To date, we've trained over 1 million people in the United States. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're in India. We're on the ground in India, and we're embarking on a 3-phase project that's hopefully going to get us to a point where we will have a culturally adapted version of our award-winning and program Stewards of Children. And so we completed the first phase in June. First of all, will it even fly here? Will our model, our delivery, our program, our training, will it fly? Answer, yes, thankfully. And now we're here to implement phase 2, which is to train some facilitators, train the trainer. And they will go out and they will offer the training, and they will come back to us with feedback. Did it work? Do the principles that we have really work? And that's awesome. And so we're going to enter that phase, big feedback loop, and then we'll come back in the spring and think about filming for a culturally adapted version. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to hand it over to Paula.
And I wanted to really quickly also just to thank the foundation for hosting us today. And it's been wonderful. We've been here since we were here in June. Well, actually, we were here last June. Then we were here this June. Now we're here again. So I'm starting to know some of you and have some familiar faces and really start to see the brilliance of this community of advocates for children. We are in the process of recreating Stewards of Children, which is our premier training program for the adult general public. It's called we use a docu-training format, which is documentary style film that documents the stories of survivors and the the guiding principles that experts can provide in teaching people prevention that they can carry out in everyday settings, families and youth-serving settings. That's our focus. So we are going to adapt this program for India. We're going to refilm survivors here. We're going to refilm experts, probably, maybe, hopefully some of you. And we are going to put together a package training that can be led by facilitators, not just experts, but lay facilitators, people in churches, people in schools, people in other youth-serving settings who can begin to distribute, Cindy mentioned the term scalable, who can begin to teach this training in a widespread way to touch the general public. That's the difference that we hope to make, is that we want to train the general public in culture-changing child protective behaviors. What we're going to do today is we can't show you our Stewards of Children program because it's too long for the time we have today. But we do have a short training on bystander intervention. I don't know if you use that term here, forgive me. But in the U.S., a bystander is a person who is not directly involved in a boundary violation, but who's observing it. So we're all often bystanders. And whether that be in our families, whether that be on a train, whether that be when we see something that we go like, that doesn't look right, that doesn't feel right between an adult and a child or an older youth and a child. And so we're kind of doing a little demonstration here so that you can kind of get the gist of how we train the public with this modality. So in a moment we're going to start a short film. You also have a worksheet in front of you that you can follow along with. Typically after the film, if we were training the general public, we would have this interactive discussion about the training points in the film. We're not going to do that because we're going to just have a question and answer. But so I'll just go straight to the film and you can start to get a sense of how we do this work. So this is a sort of a supplement to our primary training. Yeah. So it's called Bystanders, Protecting Children from Boundary Violations and Sexual Abuse. By way of various studies, to know that Stewards of Children not only is changing, as she said, attitudes and knowledge, but it's also changing adult protective behaviors. And so we know that that is really critical in creating cultural change. This bystander piece, which hopefully we're going to show you momentarily, we believe is a big piece of how culture change happens. Because while it's very important to intercept child sexual abuse after the fact and do the restoration and the justice components and so forth. On the front end, we hope to prevent it in very concrete ways, one of which is getting bystanders involved in sort of inserting themselves when they see something that looks like it could be breaching the boundaries of a child. So, as we know, oftentimes offenders groom children before abuse takes place. A lot of these grooming behaviors sometimes look a lot like healthy, normal behaviors on the part of adults, spending time with children, maybe giving them gifts, those kinds of things. But when we can start to identify grooming behaviors and intervene before abuse takes place, that to us is bystander engagement. That's adults being aware that sexual abuse takes place and then getting involved when they see those kinds of behaviors and just intercepting them in not in aggressive ways, not in offensive ways, but in gentle, assertive ways when we see an adult crossing safe boundaries with a child. So, Suchi isn't comfortable with that game. Can we please, stop and, come, let's go play with the other children. So, simple intervention where we describe the behavior. You'll see this in the film. We set a limit, and then we move on. Move on meaning just moving on to the next activity. So the idea being not that we're going around confronting people, but that most of us have, a lot of times most of us have a sense when we're witnessing a boundary violation that something isn't right, but we don't necessarily know how to intervene in a way that is comfortable or is sort of socially acceptable. And so we do nothing because we're just not sure how to have that happen. So instead, we're looking for adults to get engaged in ways that protect the child right there in that moment. Let me open it up and just see if anybody has any other questions, but we could, so in the video we talk about, we may not get to the video. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Chandani, and if I'm audible, then I don't need the mic, but okay. Okay. Yeah, I was wondering whether you have felt, or even NGOs in India working on CSA feel that there probably is more emphasis being given in their work to basic awareness sessions for children and adults on child sexual abuse, and not so much awareness on all the various kinds of service providers and the quality and efficacy of their services. I sometimes feel that there is reinventing of the wheel happening, there is the chasing of the low-hanging fruit happening. So if I am invited as a sexuality educator by a college like St. Xavier's to do a basic awareness talk, I can do it, of course. Not to say that students in that college don't need or won't benefit from such a session, but am I doing it at the cost of other communities where the risks are far higher, the presence of such incidents is reported and known or likely to be higher? So I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm sure this is a fantastic program, and Indian communities will benefit so much from having access to a better module, etc. But I mean, this is just something I keep thinking about from time to time. So just is it basic awareness talks as in sessions, which of course will be empowering, but given that there have been very many different kinds of awareness sessions, movies, a television show that had an episode on child sexual abuse that also happened to create some basic awareness.
Yes. Yeah. I can answer. Okay, good.
That happen with adults, and we might not call it the bystander program the way you do, but there are a lot of modules that exist within the country which are focusing at adults, may it be community youth, may it be parents, may it be teachers, or the government agencies, etc. So I wanted to understand, before bringing your program to India, have you had the opportunity to study some of these models, and if yes, what have been your insights, and how does this program bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's that's our process right now in phase 2 for sure, is trying to understand what else is out there here. I can say that when we talk about teaching adults, we're looking more at prevention. So we have like a 5-step model. The first step is awareness, like awareness building, like what are the statistics? What are the impacts of sexual abuse on a survivor? But step 2 being looking at what we call one adult, one child, isolated situations, and how to prevent those in youth serving settings. So we focus there. Step 3 is that whole component of how to talk with children, both about like kind of about sexual abuse, about the safety of then the sanctity of their bodies, and that whole component of how to talk with and work with children in protecting themselves. And then step 4, looking at knowing the signs, recognizing the signs of abuse, both in children who are displaying signs of abuse, but also in adults who may be offending. And then step 5 is reacting responsibly, which is knowing how to report and understanding what the system is around reporting, and then also knowing how to do this bystander intervention piece when there may not be abuse, but you're seeing boundary violations on the part of other adults. So you could say that the first 3 steps, awareness and creating safe environments for children that prevent the kinds of situations where abuse takes place, and talking with children and talking with other adults, that's all what we call or what could be called primary prevention, meaning intercepting abuse before it ever takes place. And that's the component for the general public that we really focus on, because that's where the general public can help probably the most. And then secondary prevention being identifying those children who have been affected by sexual abuse and knowing how to engage the system in protecting those children and seeking justice for those children. So I don't know if I think that answers your question.
I want to take a couple things. Okay, first I want to address the awareness question. So it has to start with awareness. And I think if somebody says, can you come in for 30 minutes or 45 minutes and talk about the issue, I say take that opportunity regardless of the audience, because they've just opened the door for you to have a conversation. What we have to do is we have to say awareness without education doesn't really get us very far. We need to be educated. There are actually tools and skills and steps that we can take to prevent child sexual abuse. We just need to know what they are. So that's an invitation for you to go in, talk about the prevalence of the issue, talk about why it's important we protect kids, and sell them on education, and go back and educate. So I say any audience that'll open the door for you, take it. When we can get into communities that need it the most, and we can do this all over, you know, those students at Xavier will go on to become parents. They will go on to become leaders. They will go on to serve youth. They will go into all kinds of roles. If you've educated them, you've empowered them, they're going to save children in their future. I think it's very important, so thank you for what you're doing. Evaluation. Okay, so how do we know we've prevented something from happening? We have this idea of primary prevention, and where you can't measure something you prevented, right? You don't know that you prevented it. So what we do in order to measure the effectiveness of a prevention program is we create proxy variables. Well, what are the proxy variables when it comes to prevention of child sexual abuse? Those proxy variables are, do people change their behavior? So you teach them how to create a safe situation. You teach them how to intervene when they see someone crossing safe boundaries. And when they go away, do they do those things? So you measure it post-training and post-training and post-training again. Did they change their behavior? And that's how you know, or can reasonably assume, that you have an effective prevention program. Without it, you don't really know. Without that evidence, without it being scientifically evaluated by independent parties who go in and do randomized control trials and all kinds of other things I don't understand. But the essence of that is that you know you've changed behavior. When you go out and you use this program, I'll tell you, anecdotally, they will tell you time and time again, people will say, I saw this and I did something, or I went home and I had a conversation with my spouse, or I went home and I had a conversation with my child. And so we know that it's changing people, and we have the evidence to know. We have not evaluated the additional training modules. They're very short, 20-minute videos with about a 15-minute discussion. I would love to evaluate them, and maybe we will. Evaluation is expensive and it takes a long time. Why we feel confident that it works is because the major tenets of the additional training components, like this bystander piece, and we have another one called Talking to Children About Sex and Sexual Boundaries. We have another one that's appropriate touch. What's appropriate touch? We all wonder about that. When is hugging okay? When is, when should we do high fives instead, right? So, and we have another one on commercial sexual exploitation of children, which is also another big and important issue we need to tackle. But regardless, they're all built on tenets that are in Stewards. So we know Stewards is effective. These modules just take a deeper dive into those very issues. So, in the U.S., we like to say we have people that come to the training kicking and screaming. They don't want to go to hear tough topic. They don't want to sit for 2 hours. Americans, 2 hours is like, really? I have to sit here for 2 hours? But they leave wanting more. They leave empowered and they leave wanting more. That's why we have these modules, because they're like, I get that bystander intervention, and I've seen that. I've had that horrible feeling in my stomach that doesn't look right, but I haven't known what to say. So they want more, so we give them more. And then they go take bystanders, and for 20 minutes, they get some real life scenarios. And so we feel confident that the modules only enhance the learning that we know they got in Stewards. And why do we know Stewards works? This is a really, really key thing. You can teach people, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this, right? But you have to speak to their heart. You have to educate the mind, and you have to move the heart. And how do we move the heart? We move the heart with the survivor stories. We heard this morning some very poignantly shared stories, and we talked about why stories are important to motivating us to do something about this and show the reality of it. Right? And so you have to move the heart. And we believe at Darkness to Light that everything we do is in honor of the survivors. Because as we heard again this morning, survivors say, if I can stop this from happening to one child, then I'm going to tell my story. So there's that aspect of it, but also revealing is healing. It's the first step to being able to really understand what happened to them and really get to a place where they can begin the healing process. So we do everything through survivor stories. It's absolutely essential. We also, 5 steps are do's and, are we ready? And I'm
ready, but keep going.
If we do the 5,
We are ready.
the 5 steps are do's and don'ts, right? Do this, don't do that. That's essential. That's skill building. But you got to be empowered. And what does it mean to be empowered? Well, to be empowered, you have to first be willing to make a choice that I'm going to do something to protect this child. I'm going to do something to intervene. I'm going to do something to prevent. I'm going to do something to protect. You have to make that choice, because you can make a choice, and that choice is to do nothing. So we have to make the right choice. And then you have to be willing to take a risk. Intervening and preventing everything associated with this issue, to speak out even against this issue, involves taking a personal risk. And we have to support each other to do it, because nobody's going to go out on a limb and take a risk if they're going to fall down and nobody's going to pick them back up. We have to do we have to have those 3 skills. And so our training, survivor stories, empowerment, 5 steps. That is why I believe wholly in my heart that it changes people's behavior. Because it does those 3 things. It helps people really understand what's happening to children. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much. So I think we're probably just about out of time. What I want to say most importantly is that we are here to learn. This conference has already been extraordinary for us in understanding the dynamics here in India, some of the cultural differences that we have between our 2 countries. The brilliance of this community has just blown us away. So we're delighted to be here with you. We do have some materials out front on the table if you'd like to take them. I don't know if I have time for any other questions. Probably not, I'm going to guess. Does anyone have questions?
I'm Vidya, I'm from Thulir. I've done the online D2L program years ago. And what I find, what I'd like to know is, there certainly is a huge cultural difference between America and India. There's no doubt about it. But within India itself, there are so many cultural complexities. So I just would like to know as to how you'll plan to take those into account if you're going to roll out this program, in terms of would it be applicable to say a a parent community in a tier 2 city of schools? Would it be applicable to there, within India, there are, as I said, there are so many complexities, the wheels within wheels within wheels. And how do you all plan to kind of bring some uniform consistency across across the board?
Thank you. That's a great question. We've heard that so consistently, that very concern, or that just as an issue. Our hope is, it's difficult because every time we expose people to the project, people want it. So we don't want to withhold it from people. I mean, ultimately, we want to create an Indian version with experts who can give voice. The idea isn't for the American version to just be laid on people. So ultimately, we're hoping to film a diverse cross-section of survivors and experts who actually convey the information. So if you'll notice, the host, which happens to be me, is reiterating the teaching points, but the voice of the material that expresses those cultural nuances are actually coming from the survivors and the experts, in this case in the American culture. So we think that that methodology will be helpful in making the content and the cultural nuances germane to this culture. But you're right that we're here primarily to learn, so I actually don't know the answer to that question, but you should know that that question is in our mind because it's been posed a number of times. We thought we would try to keep it sort of contained to Mumbai and to the cross-section of the population here for whom this methodology, film and workbook, would work. But we've already been unable to do that because people want it. So we trained a facilitator in Delhi. There's someone trained from Chennai who's taking literally the US version out to the community because they want it. So we're going to just have to be really delicate about that. We know that even the current materials we're using aren't going to work in certain communities because of reading level, because of cultural differences, and so on. So we're going to do the very best job we can of filming across a cross-sector of ethnicities, cultures, religions, socioeconomics, but also, and then I think it's going to come from all of you, how to best morph this program in ways that can meet the different segments of society that we have represented in India. So I know that's not a precise answer, but we plan to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Alankar. I'm a social worker. I have a sort of related question. I was curious about, you mentioned, or rather your colleague mentioned, that in the first phase of the program or the model, you established the cultural relevancy of the model to the Indian context, and I was wondering if you could illuminate that part of the process for us in terms of how did you ascertain that?
Yeah, thank you. We were invited here in June of 2014 by our partner Jeevan Adhar, who is, you might know them. They do transformative aftercare services for trafficking survivors, particularly sex trafficking. And so what we talked about together is that child sexual abuse is sometimes a gateway to being trafficked. It's not the only gateway, but it certainly makes children more vulnerable. So they thought it made sense to invite us to do some child sexual abuse prevention training, plus for their staff and so forth. So we came and we did about 6 groups. I think we trained about 300 people when we were there for a week. And we didn't know how it was going to go, actually. And we didn't think we were coming. We thought we were coming to help them out, to explore what their organization was doing. I mean, it was not in our minds that we would make this training for India. But those 300 people that we trained over 6 groups just were like, can we get this here? And we were like a deer in headlights because we had no plan for doing that at all. And so we said, well, gosh, I mean, you know, then someone said, can you at least translate it to Hindi? Just give it to us as is, give it to us in Hindi. So we did that. We translated it to Hindi. And we thought, well, gosh, you know, we started to think, well, we know it's not totally, we know that like maybe there's something that's needed because obviously people are so excited about this, but we know it's not appropriate for India. It's just not. I mean, the examples that the survivors give, the context isn't right. None of it's right. The services aren't right. The legal response system isn't right. There's a lot of stuff that's not right. But the fundamentals of it, people were hungry for. So we said, okay, so we put this project together. And then we thought, well, let's come back. Okay, let's go ahead and start doing a pilot then. And we're going to see where we know it works well enough in the U.S. and we know the fundamentals work here because some of it's so universal. Taking risks, all these things. But, so we thought, well, let's put it into the hands of some facilitators. When Indian facilitators go out and use the existing program, where do the wheels fall off the bus? Where does it not work? We're really actually looking more now for what doesn't work about it than what does, because we feel confident in what we know works, but what we don't know is where the holes are. So what facilitators are going to do now is go out and do the training. We trained 18 a couple days ago. They're going to go out, give the training, and we're going to be in touch with them. First, they're going to stay in touch with their trainees, who are from the general public, we hope, and their coworkers. And what we've given them targeted questions to answer. When they go out and do the interventions prescribed by the program, what happens? If they try to make a report, what happens? We've heard a lot of that today. If they try to talk with children or other adults, what happens? We want to see where did the training actually empower and prepare them, and where did it fall apart, more importantly, so that when we come back to interview experts and survivors, we're not going to be the ones telling what the new interventions are. Actually, we hope that the experts here on the ground are the voices that end up on the film. So that's the idea, is that then we know what to ask at least. It's not really our job to know how to train people, it's to know how to interview people so that when we do this docu-training, this documentary style film that has this training function, the voices will actually come from you all and from survivors in teaching the public how to respond and prevent effectively. So that's our methodology, if you will. You're welcome. Thank you all. Thank you so much for hosting us. Sorry for the craziness.